We're here on Cloth Fair to look at the Rising Sun, an absolutely stunning Sam Smith's pub. Now, Cloth Fair's been very important for hundreds of years when it comes to the English economy. Around the 1300s, mid-1300s, we had what we call the Black Death, a plague which wiped out half of England. As a result, a lot of land became up for grabs. The English merchants capitalised on this and filled England with sheep, and therefore the wool industry dominated. This is before the British Empire, the big tobacco trades and so on. So through the late 1300s, 1400s and so on, Cloth Fair was the booming industry for textiles, wool and so on. But we're going to talk today about a particularly macabre piece of history. This pub sits directly opposite St Bartholomew's Hospital. Now, we're going to talk about grave robbery and murder in association with anatomy, with the medical industry, something I've spoken about in the past. I've spoken about it in Scotland in association with Burke, Hare, Resurrectionists, but now let's talk about the London Burkers and their association with sites like this and public houses just like the Rising Sun. So the Rising Sun and many others like it served what we call the Resurrectionists. A resurrectionist is someone that digs up bodies that are already deceased to hand them in to the medical industry, to anatomists, so they can then teach their lectures so that their students can go on to become doctors and so on. Now, there's a difference between a resurrectionist and Burke and Hare. So a lot of people think that Burke and Hare in Scotland, because Edinburgh was one of the main important places for the medical industry. Burke and Hare weren't actually resurrectionists. They never dug up a body. So I'm being pedantic here so you understand the difference in what I'm about to explain. A resurrectionist will dig a person up. Once you start murdering people, you're no longer a resurrectionist. You're a murderer. So the people that would go into this pub, the London Burkers or pubs like this, they basically were just murderers. The term burking differentiates you from a resurrectionist. Burke and Hare would asphyxiate and suffocate their victims so that the anatomists couldn't tell that they had been murdered, and they'd cover them with mud because immorally the medical industry would turn a blind eye if they thought you had dug the bodies up. The term burking is to kill someone via asphyxiation so that it's harder to tell how they died. So the London Burkers got their name because they copied Burke and Hare, who only a few years earlier had been caught in this process. They had handed in about 17 admitted bodies. Their first body, though, only 16 of the bodies were murders. The first one was because someone died in one of their lodging houses. And then this sparked the idea between the two men and their partners who posed as their wives. So the Burke and Hare tale stemmed all across Britain and, dare I say, Europe. As a result, a few years later, you've got the London Burkers, who would surround themselves in places like this church, hospitals. They would earwig in pubs, waiting to see if one of your family members had snuffed it, someone had been condemned. And eventually, what happens is people become tired of waiting for people to die naturally, so they take it into their own hands. Now, if you're in the medical industry, you need about 3 bodies at least during your school reign to really pass and get a decent qualification as an anatomist. So the requirement for bodies was well above what they could actually get hold of. And this is why the blind eye was taken. And this is where we have to really start talking about things in a sense of philosophy when we talk about which was more important, morality or the growth of the medical industry. Because the people doing this were not doing it for you or for me, certainly not. They were doing it to make a pound note. But the truth is, they did help the medical industry become what it is today. And the next time you're on an operating table, you may actually owe a piece of information that could save your life to one of these scoundrels that was digging up bodies, or dare I say, murdering innocents. So John Bishop and Thomas Williams were the famous London Burkers. Now, John had actually come from a pretty decent family, and his family had left him a business. His father had left him a business. But due to his success in grave robbing, he packed it in because he was making enough money, because it was a very lucrative trade. Years later, that's when he fell in with Williams. Williams had not long got out of prison, and he moved in with John. Now, Williams, a younger man, is alleged to be the one that said to his friend John, listen, you're getting a bit older now. It's a bit difficult for you to drag these bodies out. Why don't we jump the gun and just start murdering? Because he had seen a few years earlier how Burke and Hare had got away with it for so long. Thus, they began killing. And they used the same methodology as Burke and Hare to try and hide the fact it was a murder, except instead of, straight up asphyxiation by leaning on the chest, what they did is they would intoxicate you, take you to their house, and then whilst you was asleep or semi-unconscious, they would drag you to a well nearby, and they would dip you in the well so that you drowned. So how were the London Burkers caught? Well, Bishop and Williams had picked up a 14-year-old boy, and they had tried to sell the body to Guy's Hospital, but were turned away probably because it was under suspicious circumstances. So they took it over to King's College, the anatomy centre of King's College. Now, when they've placed this young boy on the slab and then asked for money, the first anatomist that laid eyes on the boy noticed that he had heavy bruising, and importantly, his teeth seemed to have been ripped out very recently. He also didn't look like he'd been dug up. Now, anatomists were pretty immoral in their own way, because if you had been dug up, they would ignore it. But this particular circumstance, the anatomist was bothered. So he went and got the head of the anatomy department. The head of the anatomy department then came down, saw the body, and agreed that there was something wrong here. So they stalled. One of the rumours of how they stalled was they were trying to find the right change or the right money to pay the men. Then they take off and find some local police. This is when the men were apprehended, not just Bishop and Williams, but their courier, James May, who allegedly knew nothing about it. Now, when they were put on trial, Bishop and Williams did admit to their crimes, as well as a series of other crimes that they'd done before being caught for the Italian boy. Now, James May was actually pardoned, even though he did still have to face deportation, because people probably didn't believe he didn't know he was transporting dead bodies, even if he hadn't been taking part in the murders. When the London Burkers were executed, the public came out and celebrated as if they hadn't been turning a blind eye themselves anyway. There's lots of members of the public that were benefiting from this, advising people, because lots of people didn't actually have the nerve to do it themselves. So someone that they knew, an associate, they might tip them off, and there was always someone willing to make a pound note just to help the medical industry, dare I say. But as I said earlier, we can safely say that no one was trying to help the medical industry. And if we look at people like Dr. Knox, who was dealing with Burke and Hare, or the people that were buying the bodies directly from Williams and Bishop, we can only conclude that the medical industry was probably far more immoral at the time than moral. It's all very well that one or two anatomists might have seen that there was a murder at play and then wanted to tell the authorities, but it must have been the case that most turned a blind eye. And this boy's teeth missing is an indicator that the dentist would also be paying you an additional sum just for teeth. Wealthy people needed new teeth all the time, and therefore it was lucrative to just go and smash someone's teeth out of their dead body. So pubs like the Rising Sun and many pubs in Edinburgh, the Lawn Market, Grass Market, these sorts of locations were rife for Resurrectionists. To this day, the beautiful Rotherhithe Church, which is opposite the Mayflower pub, there is still a watchtower, because that cemetery was robbed often by Resurrectionists. So walking around everywhere, you will see evidence of this. And when I was in Scotland, I was covering the subject of mort safes. Mort safes were placed on graves, and you'll have seen this when you walk into graveyards, and you'll be thinking, what's this about? It looks like they're trying to keep zombies in. Well, no, they were trying to keep the living out. So in Edinburgh now, they had to replace 2 example mort safes because during the wars, a lot of metal was ripped out of graveyards. You'll see it outside of houses, metal was ripped. All of this would have been ripped off to be used for weaponry of different descriptions. But once, many, many graves, especially of wealthy people, were caged off. And I have wondered many, many times as to how many of the graves that we walk past every day are actually empty because they were emptied by resurrectionists. Anyway, think for yourself, and we'll see you soon. Take care.